After 6 years of what I thought was a perfect marriage, I discovered my wife was secretly planning to divorce me, take everything I owned, and leave me in debt. But I found out just in time and outsmarted her at her own game before she could destroy my life. For 6 years, we built a life that felt almost choreographed. 4 of them as a married couple, the rest locked in routines that felt secure, predictable, even joyful. Mornings started with quiet coffee. Evenings ended with film debates or takeout from the Thai place she loved. Our cadence wasn't flashy, it just worked. I never thought of marriage as fragile. It felt like a sturdy construct we'd reinforced daily, with shared bills, mutual routines, and dumb inside jokes about our obsession with mint tea or my inability to fold laundry properly. She was my teammate, my constant, my anchor. She didn't guard her phone. It would sit unattended for hours, no codes, no secrets. We both had access to what we needed, and neither of us abused that trust. Finances were loosely managed, but sufficient. We paid the mortgage together, saved when we could, and indulged when we wanted. There were no red flags, no subtle warnings. Every "we should do date nights soon" was met with enthusiasm. Every "you okay?" was answered honestly. At least, I believed it was. I wasn't naive, but I wasn't suspicious either. That version of me, the version who thought consistency guaranteed truth, is someone I barely recognize now. He was sleepwalking through certainty, unaware of the erosion happening quietly beneath the surface. Looking back, I can't pinpoint the first crack. It wasn't loud. It didn't arrive in an argument or a betrayal. It crept in like humidity, invisible, slow, relentless. It began with routine disruptions, quiet enough to dismiss, but persistent enough to leave an imprint. She started carrying her phone everywhere. Even trips to the laundry room or bathroom weren't without it. Once I joked, "What, running a spy ring now?" She laughed, a bit too quickly, and said something vague about work emails. Then came a password. She'd never locked her phone before. Suddenly, it required a passcode, which she never offered to share. I didn't ask. It felt inappropriate, even if something inside me stirred with unease. She told me it was about security, the usual spiel about hackers and sensitive data. Again, I nodded, but things continued to evolve, and always in the same direction, away. Phone calls started happening in other rooms. A ring, a glance, then a brisk exit to the balcony or bedroom. If I asked, I got the same answer. Just a colleague. Sometimes just a friend. No names. No context. She started placing her phone face down on the table. The first time I reached across the couch, she quickly moved it away. The moment lasted barely a second, but it was surgical, instinctual. I pretended not to notice. What unsettled me wasn't the behavior itself. It was the shift in tone. Our conversations, once easy and full of warmth, started feeling strained. When I mentioned our anniversary trip or asked about buying a new car, she replied with distant shrugs and noncommittal hums. We weren't fighting, but something vital had changed. The emotional access I'd taken for granted, simple, unspoken trust, felt barricaded. And she wasn't offering keys anymore. I never planned to follow her, but curiosity and dread tipped the balance. One afternoon, she said she was meeting a friend for coffee. My errands conveniently passed by that cafe. I parked a block away and watched her through the window, phone pressed to her ear, pacing under the awning. Every gesture felt rehearsed. I stayed in the car, quietly sinking into the seat, straining to hear. Through the glass, I caught fragments. "It's almost ready, starting fresh soon." My pulse leapt. The words weren't about work. They were about something larger, something she was building behind my back. The conversation ended. She tucked her phone away and slipped inside. I hesitated, stunned by how casual she looked after delivering an ominous message. Driving home, my thoughts raced. I replayed our last weeks. The late-night whispers, vague justifications, and that urgent push to reorganize our finances. What emergency could warrant this secrecy? My stomach knotted every time I recalled her face, calm and distant, as if she'd rehearsed a performance meant for someone else. I didn't confront her. I couldn't. I needed proof. something concrete to transform my wild suspicions into certainty. But each passing minute without confrontation felt like choosing blind faith over self-preservation. I realized I had entered unfamiliar territory, the chasm between trust and survival. That night, I lay in bed staring at the ceiling, wondering if I was about to lose everything. I vowed to seek clarity. No more ignoring the signs. No more excuses for the anxiety gnawing at me. Tomorrow, I would begin gathering evidence, piece by piece, until I uncovered what she was planning, and why I found myself so utterly unprepared. I woke at 3 a.m., heart racing, mind replaying her hushed tones and covert exits. Sleep offered no solace. By dawn, I was hunched over our online banking portal, tracing every withdrawal. Small sums, $20, $30, $40, disappeared under vague descriptors, miscellaneous, online transfer. None matched groceries, bills, or anything I recognized. My fingers trembled as I downloaded PDF statements and printed screenshots. This wasn't paranoia. It was proof of a hidden pattern. Fear hardened into resolve. Direct confrontation felt futile. I needed a plan, not more denials. I called my college friend, now an estate attorney. He listened without judgment. When I described the secret calls and unusual transfers, he moved methodically, opened new personal account in my name, set up a revocable trust for investments, transfer property title into an irrevocable structure under my mother's name, secure power of attorney for emergencies. Legal jargon fell into place like stepping stones towards safety. By mid-morning, I drafted a checklist. Open solo checking/savings accounts. Convene with notary to execute trust documents. Retitling mortgage and deeds. Move stocks and retirement accounts. Guilt flared. Was I tearing apart our marriage to shield myself from her? Then I recalled her coffee rendezvous and the whispered starting fresh soon. Vows meant nothing if one party built schemes behind the other's back. Armed with printed forms, I locked myself in my study. Signing pages felt like severing trust, yet every signature fortified my future. I placed the notarized documents into a discreet folder, breath coming easier now that fear had shape and strategy. The first defensive lines were drawn. My world had fractured, but I vowed to emerge whole, protected by preparation rather than blind faith. I spent the next morning at 3 financial institutions and the notary's office, executing every document from my checklist. First, I opened 2 new personal accounts at a different bank, checking and savings, ensuring no joint ownership. Then I met the notary and signed a revocable trust paperwork, appointing my mother as trustee and successor beneficiary. Property deeds were refiled under the trust name, with new mortgage paperwork routed through my attorney to avoid direct contact. Next, I logged into our online investment platform and initiated transfers. All equity funds, retirement accounts, and stock portfolios were moved into the trust account. Each transaction generated email confirmations, which I forwarded to a private address. I set up dual-factor authentication on my devices, distinct from any shared passwords, so only I could manage these new assets. By mid-afternoon, every major asset was shielded. I placed the signed trust documents and bank confirmations into a fireproof safe at my mother's house. I called her briefly, without details, and confirmed she'd received the package. Relief hit me in waves, followed by guilt so sharp I could hardly breathe. I reminded myself this was protection, not punishment. Returning home, I maintained my usual routine, casually asking about dinner, offering to fold laundry, smiling at shared sitcom reruns. She never questioned bank statements or legal mail, and the silence felt like a temporary truce. Yet beneath the calm, I knew the true warlines were drawn. My future no longer rested on her goodwill. That night, I lay awake reviewing every signature, every transfer ID, and those whispered words, starting fresh soon. Prepared for what came next, I finally drifted into restless sleep, buffered by strategy, but haunted by loss. After the legal fortress was in place, our days returned to a fragile routine. Mornings still began with her humming over coffee, Evenings closed with her favorite show flickering on the screen. On the surface, nothing had changed. Beneath it, every moment felt like walking a tightrope. One misstep, and the whole pretense could shatter. She never mentioned finances again. No new passwords, no whispered phone calls in the hallway. When her phone buzzed beside her plate, she ignored it until she slipped into another room. Those small departures became markers on my mental map. Secret checkpoints confirming the gulf growing between us. I buried myself in work and errands to dull the constant churn in my gut. Grocery shopping, answering emails from my attorney, scheduling follow-up calls. Each task was a brick in my new reality. But tasks can't replace trust. And by nightfall, the silence echoed louder than any argument ever could. The kitchen, once warm and lively, felt cavernous. I reached out to old friends under the guise of casual check-ins, probing for news. Their guarded expressions and clipped updates told me she'd been rewriting our story in private. People she once trusted had retreated, unsure which version of her to believe. I realized she'd built a network to isolate me, a web I now had to unravel. Sleep became a scarce commodity. Lying awake, I replayed her every gesture. The phone-down reflex, the rushed walk to the balcony, the coffee date that wasn't about coffee. Each memory sharpened my resolve. I was no longer the man who assumed loyalty. I was someone hardened by mistrust, focused on exposing the undercurrent of betrayal. The quiet truce held for now, but I sensed an approaching storm, one that would demand more than defensive paperwork. It would demand confrontation, proof, and the courage to dismantle the world she'd constructed behind my back. I opened her social feeds as though deciphering a code. Instagram posts, hidden likes, and tagged photos formed a trail. He appeared in snapshots, a hand resting on her shoulder at that cafe, a reflection of his silhouette in her bedroom mirror. Comments like, "You've got this," and cryptic emojis marked the shift from friendly to conspiratorial. Each digital breadcrumb reinforced what I'd suspected. Someone was stoking her resolve. I cataloged every interaction. Screenshots piled up, time-stamped likes on photos I'd never seen, follow requests from a private account, direct messages that vanished as soon as I viewed them. Her friend list contracted and expanded around his profile. Mutual connections went silent or offered vague excuses. It looked orchestrated. At night, I pored over her browsing history on our shared laptop. One search caught my eye: how to protect assets before divorce. It was typed at 2:17 a.m., long after she claimed to be asleep. My stomach clenched. She wasn't only preparing herself. She was gathering data to anticipate my moves, too. The weight of each bullet point crushed me. It wasn't just infidelity or emotional distance. It was a calculated maneuver. The woman I thought I knew had become an architect of her own escape, equipped with tools to erase me from our shared life. My next step was clear: corroborate these digital leads with human testimony. I needed someone from inside her circle, someone unbiased, who could confirm his role. Tomorrow, I would reach out to an old mutual acquaintance. The quiet truce had ended. Now the hunt for truth intensified. I spent the next morning drafting a cautious message to our mutual friend, Lisa. Carefully neutral. No accusations, just concern. "Have you noticed anything unusual with Elle lately?" I hit send, heart pounding. Within an hour, her reply arrived, brief, hesitant. She agreed to meet at a quiet cafe I hadn't visited with Elle. Sitting across from Lisa, I presented printed screenshots of Elle's social media comments alongside timestamps from our bank statements. I watched Lisa's face tighten. After a long pause, she admitted what she'd seen. Elle confiding in a coworker named Jake, someone with divorce experience who'd guided her financial questions. Lisa pulled out her phone and showed me texts she'd saved, jargon about trusts and asset sequestering, advice on spousal support, and one message that read, "Don't settle for less than you deserve." Those words hit like ice. Here was confirmation. This wasn't a one-off betrayal or a tiff blown out of proportion. It was a calculated scheme, orchestrated with external counsel. I thanked Lisa quietly, relieved that I wasn't imagining things. She urged me to be careful. She feared how Elle might react if exposed. Walking back to my car, evidence in hand, I felt a mix of vindication and sorrow. The fortress I'd built around my assets felt justified but hollow, proof of distrust rather than partnership. I realized the next step, formalizing these findings for legal use. Every printed message, every saved screenshot would need to be organized, authenticable, and ironclad. Tomorrow, I would meet with my attorney to translate personal testimonies and digital traces into court-ready exhibits. The hunt for truth had moved from private investigation to legal confrontation. I spent the afternoon in my home office transforming scattered screenshots and printed texts into a coherent dossier. Page after page was numbered, annotated, and cross-referenced with dates and timestamps. Every Facebook reaction, deleted DM, and browser search for protect assets before divorce became an exhibit. My attorney had emphasized authenticity. Metadata needed to be intact, sources clearly cited, and any gaps explained. I exported original files from cloud backups, embedded invisible watermarks in PDFs, and retained logs showing file creation and access history. As I worked, each document felt like a fragment of trust shattered. The same messages I'd once overlooked now read like tactical orders. One DM read, "Don't back down," a stark reminder that manipulation had guided her actions. I highlighted that line in yellow, along with references to offshore account suggestions and advice on spousal support formulas. I created a timeline charting her transition from affectionate partner to strategic adversary, aligning it with my own records of bank withdrawals and legal transfers. The more polished the exhibits became, the heavier my chest felt. I realized these pages would serve not only to protect my assets, but also to dismantle the narrative she'd crafted. I was weaponizing our private history, evidence of betrayal that would be paraded in mediation and, if necessary, court. It was a far cry from the vows we once exchanged. By evening, the binder was complete, 20 labeled tabs, a printed outline, and USB drives containing forensic copies of digital logs. I closed the cover and sat in silence, grappling with guilt over exposing intimate messages as proof. Yet the necessity was undeniable. What began as a quest for reassurance had become a formal indictment of deception. Prepared and resolute, I was ready to introduce this dossier at our next meeting, an undeniable testament to the price of concealed schemes. Before the scheduled mediation, my world contracted to a single room, the conference office of my attorney's firm. The binder lay open across the table, exhibits fanned out like cards waiting to reveal their hand. My lawyer outlined the sequence. Let her team present demands, then introduce the trust documents, follow with social media evidence, timeline chart, and Lisa's testimony to demonstrate premeditation. Each exhibit reinforced a narrative of calculated betrayal, not spousal grievance. Emotion hovered between fear and determination. Guilt welled at weaponizing our private words. Every highlighted text message a testament to her deception. Yet necessity outweighed regret. These pages were shields against a future she'd attempted to claim. My attorney arranged for a forensic IT specialist to authenticate metadata and confirm screenshot integrity, ensuring no challenge could undermine the facts. We scheduled a dry run. I practiced my statements, controlled my tone, and anticipated her lawyer's objections, from contesting notarization dates to insinuating my own secretive motives. Despite preparations, anxiety underscored every detail. I kept my phone off after hours, focused on sleep hygiene techniques recommended by a counselor. My mother's steady voice on nightly calls reminded me of stability beyond legal maneuvers. Friends, once caught between versions of our conflict, reached out with quiet encouragement, reaffirming that truth would ultimately prevail. One evening, reviewing the timeline projections, I felt a shift. The edge of anticipation sharpened into resolve. I wasn't only defending assets, I was defending my integrity. The artifacts before me, the trust deed, the annotated screenshots, Lisa's corroboration, symbolized a final verdict waiting to be read. By the time I left the office that night, the storm felt imminent. The next sunrise would set this saga in motion, and the room where I once felt powerless would become the arena of vindication. The divorce papers arrived on a gray Tuesday, slipped under the door in a plain white envelope, stamped service of process. My heart lurched as I tore it open. The petition laid out her demands with surgical precision. Half the equity in our home, 50% of liquid assets, lump sum alimony, and full coverage of legal fees. A vague clause sought unspecified support to maintain the standard of living I've become accustomed to. Reading those lines felt like a final unraveling of the life we'd built. This wasn't a plea for fairness. It was a blueprint for erasing me from our shared past. I recognized the cold logic in her list, the fingerprints of external counsel refining every item. Even the house valuation date matched her coffee date timeline. The intention was clear: strip me of resources before I could challenge her moves. I sat at my kitchen table, petitions spread before me, and allowed the shock to settle into anger. But anger flickered out as resolve took its place. 2 weeks of meticulous preparation had fortified every asset. The trust deed, notarized transfers, and investment migrations were irreversible. Her demands collided with legal reality. She couldn't touch what no longer belonged to our joint estate. I called my attorney, voice steady despite the storm inside. He confirmed that the trust was ironclad and her petition would collapse under the weight of my preemptive measures. Relief washed over me, mingled with a bittersweet ache. I had won the battle for security, but at the cost of our intimacy. By midday, I forwarded copies of the trust documents and the evidence binder to my lawyer, who filed them as an immediate response. The battlefield shifted from emotions to motions. Court dates, depositions, motions to dismiss. As I closed the file and exhaled, I realized this confrontation marked the real beginning. The first strike had been fired, but I was no longer the unsuspecting partner I once was. Her petition's logic was as chilling as it was precise. Demands for half the mortgage equity, all investment gains since our wedding date, and a substantial lump sum alimony weren't emotional pleas. They were calculated moves. Each figure matched advice I'd uncovered in her clandestine messages. She wasn't simply hurt or seeking fairness. She was executing a blueprint crafted by someone who understood divorce law better than most family law attorneys. It wasn't her genuine voice demanding the standard of living I deserve. It was a script someone else fed her. As I reviewed her list of claims alongside the timeline of my trust transfers, the pattern emerged. Every demand was designed to collide exactly at the moment my assets would be inaccessible. No surprise clauses, no loopholes left open. This was zero-sum thinking at its worst. Instead of bargaining in good faith, she weaponized the legal system, relying on timelines and financial thresholds she knew I'd struggled to contest. My preparations had saved me, but the cold precision of her strategy left me grappling with a deeper betrayal. That someone named Jake had guided her became more than a suspicion. It was a certainty. The language in her filings mirrored his messages. Don't back down, demand what's owed, secure your future now. He'd taught her how to draft petitions, how to calculate equitable distributions that would force me into a corner. She'd become his pupil, reciting his counsel on paper as if it were her own. The woman I married, who once looked to me for life's big decisions, had ceded her autonomy to a confidant whose only loyalty was to an agenda. Understanding this shift crystallized my next steps. I wasn't just responding to her. I was exposing the puppet master. My attorney would challenge each line of her petition, not only on the merits of my trust deeds, but by calling attention to the external influence behind her claims. The courtroom needed to see that her case wasn't born of marital hardship, but of outside counsel. With that revelation, the foundations of her demands could collapse under their own artifice. My attorney assembled a small team, himself, a forensic accountant, and a family law specialist, to dissect her financial claims. We pored over her petition's calculations, line by line, matching each figure against account statements and trust filings. Every demand for half the gains since 2018 relied on an arbitrary valuation date she'd never mentioned until after my transfers were complete. The forensic accountant flagged a series of improbable salary adjustments on her resume, bonuses that appeared timed to inflate her earning history for alimony calculations. We traced one bonus deposit back to a consulting fee labeled in her files but absent from any payroll records. Another raised red flags, an offshore suggestion buried in her phone's notes, crossed out as too risky, then retyped days later, exactly when she discussed spousal support with Jake. Armed with these insights, my attorney drafted a cross-examination roadmap. Exhibit A, her own petition. Exhibit B, payment records and trust deeds proving immunity. Exhibit C, forensic report exposing the contrived bonuses and deleted offshore notes. And finally, Lisa's testimony tying her directly to third-party counsel. We anticipated every defense. Her lawyer might claim the bonuses were legitimate or her notes private brainstorming. Our counters were ready. Bank statements disproving payroll entries, device logs showing note revisions, and a timeline proving she only drafted these figures after I'd locked assets away. We even prepared a pointed question. Who advised you to label that deposit as consulting? And why was it absent from your W-2? I watched as our cross-examination script took shape, each question designed to peel away her facade of self-representation. Preparing felt like peeling skin off an old wound, unclean but necessary. By the time I left the office, the room felt colder. Yet beneath that chill lay clarity. Her scheme wouldn't survive scrutiny. The next hearing would be my chance to strip away every artifice she'd erected and reveal the truth she tried so hard to conceal. Morning light felt harsher as I loaded the evidence binder into my briefcase. Coffee's bitter warmth offered little comfort. I reviewed the cross-examination outline on my phone, every exhibit numbered, every question rehearsed. My attorney rechecked authentication logs with the IT specialist, who confirmed that metadata from the screenshots and browser histories would stand up to any challenge. In the car park, I ran through the timeline one last time. The password change, the coffee shop whisper, the midnight search queries, the notarized trust deed. Each marker had been preserved, documented, secured. There was no room for error. The foundation of my case, proof of premeditation, rested on those moments. Walking into the courthouse, the walls felt claustrophobic, the marble floors cold beneath my feet. My mother squeezed my hand before I entered. Her silent nod steadied me more than any preparation. On the bench, my attorney laid out the binder, his presence calm. Across the table, her lawyer arranged folders with matching precision, the only sign of emotion his sharpened gaze as he spotted our materials. When the judge entered, formality took hold. Opening statements were concise. My attorney framed the conflict as one of strategy, not need. This is a case of calculated asset protection versus orchestrated seizure, he declared. Her counsel retorted with an impassioned plea for fairness, though his words lacked specificity. As we moved into evidence, I felt the weight shift from personal anguish to disciplined advocacy. Each tab peeled back another layer of her scheme. The altered resume, the offshore account notes, Lisa's depositions. Her attorney objected when metadata was mentioned, but the judge overruled. Authentication had been established. By midday, I sensed uncertainty ripple through her camp. Their initial confidence faltered as the chain of digital breadcrumbs and notarized records proved unbreakable. The day's final act would be the cross-examination, a chance to force her to speak the words she'd only been coached to write. But for now, the battlefield lay clear. The evidence was displayed, their strategy undermined, and the first cracks in her narrative had begun to show. The courtroom hushed as the cross-examination began. My attorney guided the judge's attention to Exhibit C, a timeline chart juxtaposing her secretly drafted support figures with my preemptive asset transfers. Then he called Lisa to the stand. Her testimony was concise, confirming every message instructing don't back down, and recounting how Jake coached Elle through petition drafting. Next came the forensic accountant, sworn in to detail anomalous consulting bonuses that inflated her income. He explained how those deposits never appeared on her W-2, revealing a deliberate effort to boost alimony calculations. The judge flipped through bank records, eyebrows rising in disbelief as each engineered bonus was dismantled. My attorney then introduced metadata from deleted browser histories, showing searches for offshore protection strategies dated hours before L's financial proposal. With silent efficiency, he traced each keystroke back to her device and pointed out the revisions in her notes. First scratched out risk assessments, then typed clean directives for asset seizure. The courtroom absorbed every fact with mounting incredulity. As the questioning shifted to the binding trust documents, her lawyer objected, but his challenge faltered once the judge reviewed the notarizations and irrevocable language. My assets were legally untouchable. Then, the pivotal moment, reference to Jake. The judge asked L under oath whether she had consulted any third party about drafting her petition. She faltered. The courtroom leaned in. Her answer, halting and unconvincing, validated every accusation of external orchestration. By the end of the session, the strategy she'd built with Jake lay in ruins. What began as her calculated maneuver turned into an admission of puppet master dependence. Her demands, once forceful and precise, evaporated under the weight of exposed manipulation. As I gathered my papers, relief surged through me. I hadn't just defended assets. I'd reclaimed the narrative of my own life. Word spread quickly through our social and professional circles once the courtroom revelations hit. Colleagues who had once admired her strategic savvy now exchanged uneasy glances at her desk. In the break room, hushed conversations ceased when her name came up. The marketing firm where she worked issued a terse statement about pending personal matters, and 2 projects abruptly shifted to other team members. Her promotion pipeline froze overnight. On social media, mutual friends who had taken her side began retracting their endorsements. The group chat titled Weekend Warriors went silent. Event invites stopped arriving. An acquaintance who had hosted friendly gatherings messaged to say he'd been advised not to get involved. Even her own family, once stalwart in support, circulated copies of the judge's findings. Private texts and third-party coaching laid bare. Apology calls from cousins and siblings trickled in, laced with regret. They'd never imagined she'd orchestrate her divorce like a corporate takeover. Meanwhile, the firm of her attorney grew cautious. A senior partner privately confided to my lawyer that they were reconsidering whether to push aggressive alimony tactics again, fearful their tactics might backfire and damage their reputations. Jake's name, once invisible, became an open secret. Rumors circulated that his consulting side gig in divorce strategy had lost clients overnight. Some speculated he'd abandoned the city. For me, the fallout was bittersweet. Watching her support network unravel validated every step I'd taken, yet it underscored the personal cost. A woman I once loved became a figure of scandal. My mother reminded me that consequence is the natural echo of betrayal, but empathy lingered despite its justification. By week's end, the emotional earthquake had settled into a shaking calm. The world adjusted to a new narrative, one where calculated schemes met unyielding evidence. In that shifting landscape, I reclaimed not only my assets but the truth of my own story. The final mediation unfolded in the same conference room where strategy had replaced sentiment. Her lawyer, finally muted, listened as my attorney recapped the dismantling of her claims. Trust deeds, asset transfers, forensic findings, and Lisa's testimony. The mediator, noticing her dwindling options, proposed a streamlined settlement to save time and reputations. Under the new terms, she would receive a modest lump sum payment to cover personal expenses and legal costs. No alimony, no half equity, no claims on my trust assets. The house, retirement accounts, and investment portfolio remained entirely under the irrevocable trust. She retained her car and personal effects, along with a small share, less than 10%, of the joint checking balance to cover immediate living expenses. A clause waived any future claims and barred attempts to reopen the settlement. This is equitable, the mediator observed, given the demonstrated premeditation and asset protection. I watched her face tighten as she realized the gulf between her original demands and the new reality. Her lawyer nodded reluctantly, eyes cast downward, acknowledging that the evidence binder had defined the discussion's limits. My attorney slid the settlement draft across the table. She signed, her pen trembling. The room exhaled. When a mediator declared the agreement final, a strange calm settled over me. The settlement spared no theatrics, just plain language and firm boundaries. I filed the signed documents with the court later that day. In exchange for her small payment and retained personal items, I secured not only my assets, but the legal closure I'd fought for. Walking out, relief washed through me in waves. What began as a fortress of mistrust ended in resolution. Terms that reflected facts, not fiction. The final mediation wasn't a victory lap, but a definitive end. The settlement sealed a new beginning, one built on certainty, not the illusions she once crafted. The final gavel fell, but the echoes lingered in every corner of my life. Colleagues who once whispered now greeted me with cautious respect, and friends who drifted away began re-engaging, offering invitations to dinners, weekend hikes, and coffee meetups that once felt routine. I realized trust, once shattered, can be rebuilt in new forms. With a legal battle behind me, I turned to restoring my personal space. My mother arrived with paint cans and brushes, transforming the living room from somber neutrals to vibrant teal. Each brushstroke felt symbolic, replacing the ghosts of conflict with fresh energy. Murals of abstract shapes replaced framed photos of us. Walls became canvases for renewed possibility. Professionally, I dedicated myself to long-postponed projects. I launched a freelance consultancy, leveraging years of marketing experience to advise small businesses. Focus sessions replaced late-night anxieties. Each completed contract reminded me of self-reliance and competence beyond a shared surname. Financial independence, once threatened, now stood stronger than ever. Emotionally, I confronted the scars left by betrayal. I enrolled in weekend workshops on mindfulness, learning to anchor in the present rather than replay past injustices. A quote from meditation instructor resonated. Healing is reclaiming your own story. I journaled daily, mapping progress from shock to calm resolve. As weeks turned into months, I noticed subtle shifts, genuine laughter at social gatherings, excitement planning a solo vacation, even curiosity about future relationships. The man who once walked into the courtroom weighed down by suspicion now moved forward with cautious optimism. The chapter marked by deception was closed, not erased, but reframed as a catalyst for growth. Emerging from the legal crucible, I found my compass reset by the ordeal. The initial weeks of freedom felt disorienting, a sudden expanse after narrow corridors of distrust. I filled mornings with sunrise runs, each stride dissolving residue of sleepless nights. Afternoons became laboratories for creativity. I transformed a corner of my home into a small studio where sketchbooks and marketing drafts sat side by side. It felt fitting that after dismantling hidden schemes, I was rebuilding from a blank canvas. I carried forward 3 vital lessons. First, vigilance is a form of self-respect. Boundaries must be defined, defended, and revisited. Second, authenticity cannot be outsourced. No external advisor, no matter how persuasive, could supply the conviction that comes from owning one's narrative. Third, resilience grows in the space between betrayal and restoration. Adversity, once processed, becomes a catalyst for deeper self-knowledge. A single line from a workshop instructor echoed in my mind. Truth liberates the finder and the speaker. I embraced that truth by curating new rituals, a weekly reflection hour to journal insights, a monthly check-in with friends to share struggles and successes, and an annual vision retreat planned solo. These practices anchored me, ensuring I'd never again drift into complacent trust without healthy skepticism. As professional opportunities arose, a speaking invitation at a local small business summit, a collaborative design project for a nonprofit, I recognized the value of vulnerability harnessed as strength. Each yes marked progress, a return to sharing space, ideas, and resources with others, unburdened by concealed agendas. The horizon felt genuine rather than mirage-tainted. Those scars remain. They're now badges of survival rather than reminders of defeat. My story, once hijacked by hidden counsel, stands reclaimed, pointing toward new horizons built on transparent choices and lessons hard-won. The final settlement sealed more than legal closure. It granted permission to turn the page. I cleared the study's desk of case files and repurposed the space for a new endeavor, authoring a memoir on trust, betrayal, and regeneration. My first draft opened with the words, "We are architects of our own resurgence," a conviction born from navigating shadows into light. Daily life regained its gentle rhythms. Grocery lines became moments to observe strangers' kindness. Morning coffee tasted richer without undercurrents of suspicion. Friendships deepened as I shared my journey with those who asked and listened without judgment. Even the house, once a contested asset, transformed into a refuge. Sunlight streaming through fresh teal walls, plants thriving in windowsills repainted by my mother's steady guidance. Looking back, the narrative of victim and perpetrator blurred into a more complex mosaic. I wasn't merely defending against her plans. I was reclaiming my voice. The trust documents and court exhibits, though necessary, were proxies for courage and clarity. The real victory lay in rediscovering the freedom to trust wisely, both yourself and others. On the threshold of tomorrow, I stand resolute. The chapter of deception remains in the past's binder, a reference rather than a chain. Ahead lies potential unshadowed by cold calculations. Each sunrise invites a new paragraph, one authored by choice, integrity, and an unwavering commitment to truth. The story continues, and this time I hold the pen.